The Declaration of Independence has been signed, but it'll be meaningless if the Americans can't reverse their fortunes on the battlefield. In New York, Commander of the British forces General Howe has continually bested the American Commander-in-Chief, General George Washington. Howe defeated Washington in the Battle of Brooklyn Heights before forcing Washington to retreat into Manhattan, where he was then defeated in the Battle of Kips Bay and the Battle of Harlem Heights. After being defeated in Harlem Heights, Washington was forced to retreat to upstate New York. The British pursued and defeated Washington in the Battle of White Plains. Washington then made his way back to Upper New York Island, where he was defeated in the Battle of Fort Washington and forced to retreat over the river into New Jersey. The British again pursued and defeated Washington in the Battle of Fort Lee, granting the British full control for the two most important forts guarding the entrance into the Hudson River. With this, the British now also controlled most of New Jersey, Manhattan, Long Island, and much of the Hudson Valley, New York area. Washington was forced to retreat through New Jersey, but the British are in hot pursuit. By mid-December, Washington has been pushed out of New Jersey and is now encamped in Pennsylvania. The Continental Army's enlistment contract states that all soldiers will be free to return home on January 1st. With the war going so badly, there's no reason for the troops to risk their lives re-enlisting. Washington comes to believe that he's just 2 weeks away from having no army at all. Many believe the war is now lost. More desert every day. And on November 30th, when the king offered a pardon to all patriots who pledged their allegiance to the king, thousands took him up on the offer. Washington believes an audacious attack is the only way to save the revolution. He plans to cross the Delaware on Christmas night and lead a surprise invasion into British territory. The battle password he gives to his soldiers at camp is liberty or death, perfectly encapsulating his feelings at the moment. This is Grim Battaglia, and you're watching my documentary on the American Revolution and the Battle of Trenton. North of Washington's position, his second-in-command, General Charles Lee, is encamped with thousands of American troops. Washington believes that a combined army is the only way they can push into British territory and achieve victory. He repeatedly sends word to Lee, requesting reinforcements. However, Lee believes himself superior to Washington and refuses to obey his commands. Instead, Lee reaches out to Congress and requests that they appoint him as Commander-in-Chief of the Army, a request which Congress is taking very seriously at this time. Washington, in his repeated letters, writes, "I have so frequently mentioned our situation and the necessity of your aid that it is painful for me to add word upon the subject. Let me once more request and entreat you to march to my position immediately." However, Lee continues to decline. Eventually, Lee acquiesces and moves his troops to New Jersey. However, while in New Jersey, Lee separates from his army to go and meet up with a local prostitute at a cabin 3 miles from where his troops are encamped. While at the cabin, British forces surround him, and Lee is taken prisoner. When word of Lee's capture reaches London, victory bells toll in the streets. The British believed that Lee was one of the only American commanders who posed a real threat to their dominance in the Americas. When Washington receives word, he's quoted as saying, "The game is now pretty much up." However, the Americans are in for a stroke of luck. General Howe decides that with Lee removed from the picture, the Americans now don't pose a real threat at the Delaware, and so he retreats to New York and encamps his army for the winter. Meanwhile, the thousands of troops that were following Lee break away and manage to meet up with Washington at Morristown. Washington sees that his chance is now or never. He sets his battle password as victory or death and prepares to cross the Delaware and march on Trenton. Washington's plan is complex, and it will rely on precise coordination in order to succeed. He plans to cross the Delaware at 3 separate points. With his army broken into 3 divisions, the Northern Division will cross and launch an attack on Princeton in the hopes of distracting the British troops garrisoned there and preventing them from reinforcing the troops at Trenton. Washington and the main body will cross at McConkey's Ferry, 10 miles north of the city. In the south, a body will cross in the hopes of surprising and flanking the troops at Trenton. As Washington approaches the city, his army will again divide into 3 units. Washington will lead the main advance from the north. Major General John Sullivan will lead an attack on the south with the hopes of capturing bridges to prevent the troops from escaping. From the west, General Nathaniel Greene will attack, hoping to close the circle and completely entrap the troops garrisoned therein. Trenton is garrisoned by 1,500 Haitian mercenaries under the command of Colonel Johann Rall. Rall has been informed by loyalist spies that Washington is planning a surprise attack on Christmas night. However, Rall believes this plan is unrealistic, so he sends no troops to oppose the crossing on Christmas night. Rall has also been instructed that he should build fortifications around the tops of King and Queen Street. However, he declines. He believes the Americans are no match for him, and he is quoted as saying, "Let them come, we'll go at them with the bayonet," in reference to the Haitians' overwhelming victory over the Americans in the Battle of Brooklyn Heights. At midnight on Christmas, Washington and his men make their daring crossing of the Delaware River. Washington takes position on the first ship to sail across in order to encourage his men to follow. As they cross, a winter storm begins to set in, with the cold becoming so severe that several men freeze to death during the march. When Washington and his men reach the other side, Washington can only hope that his 2 other armies have also successfully made their crossings. When Washington and his men are around 2 miles from Trenton, they're startled when 50 armed men appear from the darkness and approach them. Washington was relieved to discover that it was a small armed militia force. The force informed Washington that they had just launched a raid on Trenton that very night. Enraged, Washington stated, "You, sir, may have ruined all my plans by having put them on guard." Fortunately for Washington, the attack had the opposite effect. The Haitians believed that the militia raids were the main attack that they'd been warned about. In the city, they celebrated their crushing defeat over the Americans and began to let their guard down. Washington and his men advanced on the outpost along Pennington Road. Washington, atop his horse, led a melee charge into the surprised Haitian infantry. The Haitians were startled and began organized retreat with the Americans in pursuit, firing as they fell back towards the town. Haitian troops guarding the outskirts of the town became aware of what was happening and moved to provide cover for their men. Another group of Haitians, who had been guarding the river road to the south, moved in to support their allies. Washington then ordered that a regiment of men move to Princeton Road and hold it so that the Haitians could not retreat. The Americans moved and ousted the group of Haitians who had been defending and guarding the position. With that, the Americans captured Princeton Road and blockaded the Haitians from being able to retreat towards their allied garrison troops in the town of Princeton. The Haitians retreated down King and Queen Street. The Americans pursued, moving their cannons into position on a small hill near the street's entrances. The cannons opened fire, launching a barrage of canister shot at the Haitians, devastating their defenses. The rest of Washington's infantry then followed, moving down the street and forcing the Haitians out of local homes. Meanwhile, General Sullivan had led his men down the now undefended River Road. An advanced scouting party of Haitian elite infantry, the Jaggers, emerged from the Heritage Home and saw the Americans advancing. They retreated back towards the town barracks where the rest of their battalion awaited them. The Jaggers exchanged one volley with the American troops before realizing that many of their guns were malfunctioning due to the cold. The Jaggers broke into a full retreat. Many tried to swim across the river, freezing to death, while others fled over the Assunpink Creek Bridge, which had not yet been seized. Washington led his army down King Street from the front, providing inspiration for his men. As he did this, he became aware that the 2 other groups of his army, the ones meant to cross the north and south portions of the Delaware River, had failed to make their crossings due to the severe weather. Washington learned that he was now attacking the town of Trenton with nearly 2,000 troops, less than he had intended. However, victory or death was his motto, and so he decided he must push forward. Sullivan moved his men towards the town and seized control of the Assunpink Bridge, thus cutting off another escape route for the disoriented Haitians. The Haitians attempted to hold their ground in King and Queen Street, exchanging multiple volleys with the Americans, but the weather affected their muskets, and they were being badly outmatched by the American troops. At this point, artillery from the other side of the Delaware entered the battle. Though the commander had failed to make his crossing, he had moved his artillery into position. He opened fire on the Haitian lines, devastating them. The Haitians were forced into a retreat, and the Americans pushed their advantage. Washington then moved back to the hill overlooking King and Queen Street so that he could direct the battle. He placed General Greene in command of the battle for the streets. Greene moved into position and moved his men into the V-shape where King and Queen Street met, exactly where General Rao had been recommended to build his fortifications. As the Americans pushed in, Colonel Rao was finally roused from his lodging and began to organize a defense. Haitians garrisoned in the homes throughout Trenton flooded out and strengthened the defenders' weakened regiments. The defenders, organized into three main regiments. Raw's regiment, the largest of the three, moved to advance down King Street, while the others would advance towards Queen Street. The 3rd Regiment would remain reserved to support the battle in King Street. The Americans defending King Street divided up and moved into the homes on either side of the street. Raw saw the American cannons were exposed, and the hopes of silencing them charged down the street. The Americans on either side opened fire upon Raw, devastating his troops. As Raw's men finally neared the cannons unleashed a barrage of grape and canister shot, destroying Raw's men and forcing them into a full retreat. Raw then ordered that cannons be moved to King Street so that they could return fire on the American position. They engaged in an artillery duel and managed to fire off 6 shots before their men were killed and forced to retreat. The Americans then advanced, seizing the Haitian cannons for themselves. Meanwhile, on Queen Street, the Haitian regiment was completely repulsed by the Americans. The Haitians exchanged a brief volley with the American troops before being completely pushed back by the American cannon fire. Another group of Haitians attempted to rally and retreat over the bridge defended by Sullivan and his men. As they advanced, Sullivan ordered a bayonet charge. The Haitians learned that many of their weapons were malfunctioning still due to the cold, and they too broke into a full retreat. Sullivan then broke off some of his men to go defend a street to the west to make sure no Haitians could try and escape by swimming over the river. The Haitians were beaten back, but not defeated. They were formed on the outskirts of town and prepared to flank the Americans by attacking the heights on King Street. Washington observed their movements from his elevated position atop the hill, and he moved his men into a defensive formation. The Haitians were taking fire from 3 sides, and Raw yelled for his men to go forward. Advance! Advance! The regiments began to play their fiefs, drums, and bugles to increase the troops' morale. Despite taking intense fire from the Americans, the Haitians moved forward. They were able to retake their cannons at the end of King Street. At this point, members of the town began to rise up and join the Americans in the battle. An American unit rushed forward, and after a brief fight, was able to seize the cannons back from the Haitian troops. They then turned the cannons on the Haitians and began firing. During this time, while Raoul advanced down the center, he was shot, wounded, and killed. With the death of their commander, the Haitians broke into a full-on retreat. They retreated towards the apple orchard near the creek. Washington took charge and pursued them. He screamed out to his men, "March on, my brave fellows, after me." The Americans moved in and surrounded the Haitians, who were forced to surrender. One group of Haitians had got separated during the retreat and moved towards Sullivan's position at the bridge. After a brief skirmish, the Haitians surrendered. With that, the battle was over. The battle was an astounding victory for Washington and his men. They'd had only 4 men injured and nobody killed. Meanwhile, the Haitians had lost 21 men, including their commander, and had over 900 of their soldiers captured. Though the defeat at Trenton was minor in terms of strategic importance for the British, its importance for the American army could not be overstated. The victory was celebrated across the colonies and demonstrated to the Americans that the war was, in fact, winnable. Its silence talks in Congress replacing Washington inspired many of his men to extend their enlistment by 3 months. It caused the Continental Army ranks to swell with the new influx of volunteers. But Washington was not done yet. In the next 7 days, he would make 2 more daring crossings over the Delaware and engage the British Army in a pivotal battle in the city of Princeton. This was Grim Battaglia, and if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, comment, or subscribe. I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, never stop learning.